Go ahead and do that. Okay, guys, we got an exam coming up, and woo, it is a good one.
No,
yeah.
10,000 questions.
It's close. All right, it is very, very close. So we're gonna be doing this exam on Friday. It's going to be over chapters 7, 8, and 9. All right. So so what you want to do, the exam is going to be set up just like the last one was as far as the formatting is concerned. I do not have it completed yet. Right now, you are actually correct. We're at 10,000 questions. As soon as I get done with class and lunch today, I'm going to cut out the easy ones, and that will take us down to about 9,900. Right? And then I'm going to end up with about the 40th juiciest questions that I can get out of this material, out of chapter 7, 8, and 9. So there's going to be some true-false questions. There's going to be about 10 of those. Hey, PR, could you go ahead and mute? We're getting some feedback from you. Thank you. All right, and then there's going to be some multiple choice. There's going to be about 30 questions. So there's going to be about 40 questions or so, plus or minus, right? So it's going to be the same format as we had before. Make sure you bring a lead pencil with you on Friday. We're going to do the bubble sheets again. Remember, I do not provide pencils for that. And the Scantron will not read pen. So make sure you bring a pencil with you. Also, make sure that you bring a regular calculator with you as well. I will not allow cell phones to be used as calculators, and I will not allow calculators to be shared between students. And you're going to need one on this exam, right? Because we got some calculations that we're going to be doing. So it doesn't have to be fancy, but just make sure that you bring a regular calculator with you. All right, as far as your method of study is concerned, number one, clearly the notes. First and foremost, we've done a lot of material, right? It's all in your notes. The second, any handouts that we have done. So make sure you look over the measuring the cost of living handout, computing the consumer price index, and then there was going in and converting the real values worksheet, right? So we've had 3 pretty good sized worksheets. So make sure you look over all 3 of those. And then also any material out of the book, out of chapters 7, 8, and 9 that overlap my notes is also fair game for the exam as well. All right, so make sure you're here on time, guys. We're going to get started right at 8 o'clock. You're going to get the entire time to do it. But if you come in late, you don't agree. 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock. So make sure you're here right at 10 o'clock, right? And make sure you're ready to go because I've got another class that's going to be coming in after this. And so I want to make sure that you have enough time. If you come in late, you don't get any additional time. And so be here, try to be here early if you can, get that Scantron filled out and be ready to go so you can take full advantage of all of that time. All right, so let's go ahead real quick, open your notes. And we started this entire section going in and talking about the difference between nominal gross domestic product versus real gross domestic product. And so we went in, the first thing I started talking about was, hey, look, when we go out and we measure gross domestic product every year, we measure what is called nominal gross domestic product. But the problem is when you measure nominal gross domestic product, you have both price and quantity changes that are happening at the same time. And so that's a problem. And so we know we cannot compare nominal values over time because of these price level changes. So what we need to do is to find a way to go in and measure real gross domestic product, where prices are being held constant, and we only go in and we only have changes in quantities. So once we go in and we said we make this conversion, then we can compare real values that have the same base year over time. And that way we have a meaningful measure of what we're comparing, right? Whether it be gross domestic product, wages, or whatever the case might be. All right, so know the difference between nominal and real gross domestic product. Yes?
So I thought that it says that nominal values can't be compared over time because prices change.
That is correct. Yes, that is correct. So this is what we actually measure because this is the information we have every year. But if we had numbers for nominal gross domestic product of 2018, 2019, 2020, I mean, that's what we were able to measure, but those are not comparable because of these price changes. So what we have to find a way to do is to take those values that we measured, do that voodoo on it, and turn it into real gross domestic product. And once we do, and those prices are held constant, we're only looking at changes in quantity, and those are the numbers that are comparable over time. Right? Does that make sense? So these are not comparable, but these are, as long as they have the same base year. All right, and then in that packet, that handout that I gave you it was a PowerPoint actually. We went through and I gave you some examples of why going and comparing nominal values over time is a problem. Right, so understand that concept. So then we went in and we asked the question, all right, how are we going to do this? How are we going to go in and change nominal over into real gross domestic product? Well, the first thing we need to do is to be able to measure these changes in prices over time. So we came in and we introduced the idea of the consumer price index. So know what the consumer price index is. It's measuring the change in the average level of prices of a typical market basket of goods and services purchased by a typical urban household. So we went through, and that is in that worksheet that we actually did in class, measuring the cost of living. So we went through those steps and showed how we actually determine the value of the consumer price index. So the consumer price index is the cost of the market basket in the current period divided by the cost of the same market basket in the base period multiplied by 100. So if I give you numbers for the consumer price index or numbers for the market basket, be able to go in and plug those numbers in appropriately to this formula and be able to calculate and be able to interpret a consumer price index.
Will you also give us that chart?
Okay, hold that thought for just a second. The answer is yes, but that's going to come with the other formula, right? So this is actually calculating the numbers that are on the chart, right? So if I give you the market baskets, the value of the market baskets, be able to calculate that number. Also remember, be able to determine your base year, right? So if you're given some data, the base year is always equal to 100. So be able to look at that data and be able to tell me what the base year actually is. And remember, the base year is also your reference point, and it is also the year that prices are held constant. So understand, the concept of the base year itself. So from there, then, we calculated the consumer price index, and then we came up with that big chart of numbers, right, that is actually calculated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we said, now that we have that consumer price index, now we can go in and make this conversion from nominal over into real gross domestic product. And the way we did that was to go in and use the formula, any real variable X is going to be equal to your nominal variable X divided by the appropriate consumer price index and multiplied by 100. So we have several examples that you did in the notes, and you have that entire worksheet that we did that is taking nominal, using that chart of numbers, right, to go in and plug into this formula. And that goes in and that takes a nominal and converts it into a real variable. So I would anticipate that there are going to be several questions going in and taking and converting nominal over into real variables. So we spent quite a bit of time on that particular concept.
That worksheet was fun.
Boom, boom, that's all that was. Okay, so once we were able then to convert nominal over into real values, then we went back in and we started introducing the idea of inflation. Again, up until that point, I had talked about the change in average prices. I had never mentioned the I word, right, up until that particular lecture. But I also want you to remember, inflation is not a bad thing. We do want inflation in the economy. We just want it controlled. All right, and so what is our target goal, by the way?
2%.
Very good. 2% per year is what we want prices to be increasing in the economy. So know what inflation is and know how it affects purchasing power. So we now know, and we've seen this several times, the purchasing power of money is going to be influenced by or some function of the average level of prices. So we should be pretty familiar with that scenario now. So if we know if prices are going up in the economy, then that means that each dollar we have will not buy as much as it did before. So purchasing power is going to be going down, right? That's inflation. If we have deflation in the economy, where prices are going down, then that means every dollar you have will buy more than it did before. Thus, purchasing power is going to be increasing. But keep in mind, and I hit on this a couple of different times, a lot of people think that that is the better scenario to have prices going down, but it is not, right? Because you can't grow an economy on deflationary or decreasing prices. So we want prices to be going up by 2% per year. All right, so make sure you understand that concept as well. All right, Bushy. From there, we talked about the three groups of people who are hurt by inflationary pressure. So people who are on fixed incomes, people who sign long-term contracts, and then people who do not expect, right, appropriately inflation. Those are in your notes. Under number 3, we talk specifically about the real return on an asset. So the real return is going to be equal to the nominal return minus inflation. All right. So the entire point of this particular exercise was to go in and say, look, most people believe that it's just the amount of money that you have in your pocket that is going to determine whether you're better off or worse off. And I think we blew that one out of the water, right? It's not the actual amount of money, it's what that money will actually purchase, right? Your real purchasing power. So we went in and we did that scenario where, 1 year you don't expect inflation. So, you lend the money out for a certain interest rate. The next year, you lend it out for a higher interest rate, but you expect more inflation. And what we found out is that at the end of year 2, you were physically holding more dollars in your hands, but the purchasing power of that money was exactly the same as in scenario number 1. So it's not the nominal return that matters, it is the real return that matters. So make sure you understand this equation and you're able to plug numbers into that equation and do some analysis with that. All right. From there, we went in and we started talking about the business cycle itself. So in your notes then, you have a graph that looks something like this. We have output up here. We had, let's see, no, that's wrong. backwards. We have time down here. We have output. And then in your notes, you have a graph that looks something like this. So know the 4 phases of the business cycle, right? So you have the peaks here and here. You have the troughs here and here. And then the period in between those, that's what the ones that we spent more time on. So this area right here where output is decreasing, that's what we call a recession. All right. So in your notes, there is a specific definition of a recession. So make sure you know that definition. Remember, output has to decline for 6 months or more for it to be truly termed as a recession. And know the 2 characteristics of a recession. So during a recession, output is declining and unemployment is increasing during a recessionary period. When you're going from the trough to the peak, this is known as an expansion. Right? An expansion or an expansionary period. Now, again, in your notes, you will not find an actual definition for an expansion because there really isn't one. But know the 2 characteristics of an expansion. So output during an expansion is increasing, and unemployment during an expansion is decreasing. All right, so make sure you know those characteristics. Now, it was from this discussion that we launched into our discussion of unemployment. All right. So first of all, know the 3 types of unemployment. Anybody name the first one? Cyclical. The second?
Frictional.
Frictional. And third?
Structural.
Structural unemployment. So make sure you not only know those, the definition of those, but what I am likely to do is to go in and give you a scenario of someone who is unemployed, and then you will have to put that individual in one of those 3 categories. Tell me whether they are cyclically, frictionally, or structurally unemployed. Right, so be able to apply, right, the definitions that you have. All right, from there then, once we got the 3 types of unemployment, then we asked the question, well, our goal is 4% unemployment. So what kinds of unemployment do we want to make up that 4% unemployment? Does anybody remember what the split was on this?
We want frictional.
All right, so frictional, how much? According to Todd, anyway. Nobody remembers?
1.5.
Yeah, that would be the overall. So frictional itself.
Oh.
By the way, so we want frictional. What's the other type of unemployment that we want? Structural. Which, by the way, remember, that one in and of itself sounded odd because I didn't see a good word about it. But when you're going in and you have technology changes and so on and so forth, a little bit of structural unemployment is a good thing for an economy. So my breakdown was if you want 4% total, I said about 3.5 frictional, 0.5% structural. That gives you your total unemployment of 4%. Okay, so those are the different types of unemployment that we would like to have in the economy. All right, from there, we went and said, how is that actually determined? The number that we get for unemployment, where does that actually come from? So know that it is the Bureau of Labor Statistics who actually calculates the unemployment rate. They're the same ones that do the consumer price index as well. And know the name of the survey that they use when they call households and start trying to determine whether people have jobs or not. Know the name of the survey that they use as well. That's right, the CPS, the Current Population Survey. All right, so in your notes, you have something that looks like this. You have the total population. If you're part of the total population, you can either be out of the labor force, or you can be in the labor force. If you're in the labor force, you can either be employed or you can be unemployed. All right, so you have that in your notes. I'm not so much concerned about the numbers, but I do want you, if I give you the scenario of an individual, I would expect that you would be able to put them in one of these particular categories, right? So there's a number of different ways that you can be out of the labor force. There are a number of ways that you can be in the labor force and either employed or unemployed. So be able to categorize an individual in this particular diagram. And then, given those numbers, be able to calculate an unemployment rate. So it's the number of unemployed divided by the number in the labor force multiplied by 100. So I will guarantee you there will be at least two on there that will be dedicated to actually calculating unemployment itself. And then be able to interpret the number. Remember, according to this, does anybody remember what was the number for September that we actually calculated?
7.9%.
All right, so 7.9%, that was as of September, I believe, right? Yeah. By the way, does anybody know what the current unemployment rate is?
8.7, didn't you say? Somewhere in there?
No?
6, somewhere around 6.
All right, very good. What ended up happening was the new numbers have come out. So for October, we dropped down to 6.9%. So a full percentage point drop, which is huge, right? That's a very, very good sign for the economy, particularly going into the Christmas season with all hell breaking loose, right, with this COVID thing. So that was actually very good to see. But anyway, what this says is that 6.9% of the people in the labor force are unemployed, right? Do not have jobs. So be able to, if once you get that number, be able to interpret the number that you have. Okay. I think that should get you by on unemployment. Okay. I'm going to hold off questions till we get to the end. I want to make sure I get everything covered. All right, from there, we moved on to chapter 8, which was going in and talking about aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So know that aggregate demand represents total spending in the overall economy. And this is where we went in and we started to introduce our first model of the overall macroeconomic economy, the classical school of economics. The classical school of economics. So remember, the classical school was the school of economics that was most popular prior to the 1930s. And also keep in mind that these were free market kind of people. And so if you can remember that part of it, a lot of the rest of the ideas of the classicals really go in and fall into place. All right, so in your notes, the classical said that total spending in the economy is determined by two factors. The first one was the purchasing power of money. And then the second one was the money supply itself. Whoops. Sorry about that. So aggregate demand, and then that aggregate demand, total spending, was based on purchasing power and the money supply. So what I did in your notes was derive the aggregate demand curve by going in and we put a big P up there. What does that P stand for? Very good. The average level of prices. And then the capital Y down here stands for real output. Very good. And so based on the idea of purchasing power, we ended up deriving a downward sloping aggregate demand curve. And I think we got started on Keynes last time, didn't we? So what we found was, is that, or what we're about to find, I guess, is that the aggregate demand curve just never changes, right? I mean, the idea of aggregate demand has been solid since the days of the classical economist. So we have a downward sloping aggregate demand curve. Then we ask the question, what's going to happen to that aggregate demand curve as the money supply changes in the economy? So we found out as the money supply goes up, this aggregate demand curve shifts out and to the right. So total spending increases in the economy. As the money supply goes down, then that aggregate demand curve shifts back and to the left. So if you don't have the money, you can't spend it. So total spending in the economy would go down. So once we had that part of it complete, we kind of left that alone at that time. And then we went back and we started looking at the aggregate supply curve. Now remember, aggregate supply is going to be total production in the overall economy. Now, the classical economists, and this is worth writing down again, because this is a lot of what this entire thing hinges on. The classical economists made a very important assumption about the economy. They said the economy, I can spell it, the economy will always tend towards full employment because wages and prices adjust quickly. Okay. So this is a huge deal, right, when it comes to the classical model. So two things. Know what full employment is, right? Know exactly what that concept is all about. And then understand the entire thing that the classicals, hinged this on was that the economy had a self-correcting mechanism of the market. And so as wages, as prices adjust, we will always tend back towards what our economy is capable of producing. So we talked about those concepts, and then we went in and we derived the aggregate supply curve. And what we found out is that the classical aggregate supply curve was not only perfectly vertical, but it was perfectly vertical at a particular point, and that point was full employment. Right? And we talked about the nuances of why the aggregate supply curve would look the way it does. Okay. From there, we went in and we put this entire thing back together again. I'm gonna end up making you guys seasick. All right. So we went in and we have real output, average level of prices. We have the perfectly vertical aggregate supply curve and our downward sloping aggregate demand curve. The way I have it drawn, is this economy in equilibrium?
Yes.
Yes, it is. It's an equilibrium right here, and it's an equilibrium at full employment. And that determines the average level of prices that's prevailing in the economy. So that's the entire classical model, right, that is all put together. So in your notes then, once we put it all together, I made the statement that, and there are people that misinterpret this assumption over here. They interpret this as saying that recessions can never occur in the economy. Well, we know that's not the case. The classicals wouldn't even have said that because clearly recessions and depressions did occur. What they said was, if we get ourselves in a recession or a depression, then wages and prices are going to adjust quickly. And that's going to get us right back to this point of not only equilibrium, but it will be equilibrium at full employment, what our economy is capable of producing. So we went in and we showed evidence. We actually looked at the business cycle from, what was that graph, 1835 through about the early part of the 1990s. And we showed clearly, well, that one's not vertical, is it? But anyway, we showed clearly that we did get into recessions and depressions. Clearly, I almost forgot one very important thing. This entire thing led to two different policies of the classical economist. Can anybody tell me what the first policy was?
Government should stabilize the money supply, which stabilizes aggregate demand.
Excellent. Know that first one. That becomes very, very important. Stabilize the quantity of money, which stabilizes aggregate demand. So in other words, we know if the money supply changes, then that goes in and that moves the aggregate demand curve around. Well, according to the classicals, if this aggregate demand curve is bobbing up and down, well, prices and wages are adjusting quickly. We're not getting any more output out of it. What we are getting is inflation, deflation, inflation, deflation, and those prices are bouncing around like a basketball. And they said that is unacceptable. So government, you go in, you stabilize that quantity of money. And as you do, that stabilizes aggregate demand, stabilizes output and prices in the economy. And then that led to policy number 2, which was what? Laissez-faire, do nothing, right? Government, stay out of it, leave it alone. Let the market go in and take care of the rest of the economy. Okay, so there is your, and then we went in and in your notes, and I explained why the classical economy failed, right? Why this entire model failed. Because it looks like it was working very, very well for the most part up until the 1930s. But then all of a sudden in October of 1929, it looked like the self-correcting mechanism completely went away. And we got into the deepest recession that not only the United States, but the world had ever seen. And the market did not adjust. The classicals were standing around not knowing what to do about it. And they basically said, just wait. In the long run, we will get back to full employment. But they didn't know what that meant. They had no timetable on it because this had never happened before in the economy. So that's where we left it. And then Monday, we started off talking about the Keynesian model of the economy, which will not be on the exam. Okay, so nothing on the Keynesian model will be on the exam. That'll be on the final. So we're just going up and through the classical model of the economy. Okay, I believe that should keep you busy for the next 48 hours. I'm going to look real quick, make sure that's fine, that's good. Okay, the one thing you want to remember, and I think you saw this on my first exam, this is going to be even more important this time, is to understand the concepts, not memorize the definitions. Okay, so be able to draw the model or take a model and work with it, show what happens to prices and so on and so forth. So be able to work with the model and think about where somebody falls in the ranks of the unemployed, be able to put them in those particular categories, and so on and so forth. Watch it. Okay, I think that should do it. Questions now about anything? Yes, ma'am.
Are we allowed to have note cards?
There's not that much here, is there?
Are you serious?
What did I do last time? Did I give you no cards last time?
We have such good attendance, and we love you, Mr. Shepherd. And you even shared your Twinkies with us. We're your favorite class.
We have a special bond because you gave us Twinkies.
You did.
The special bond. Okay. I like that answer. You know what I'm saying? Did I really? I let you last week.
Yes, you let. I remember that's the only way I passed.
Mr. Shepherd, what if we get you a goat made out of Twinkies?
Oh, I still couldn't eat it because it's a goat. I mean, it's sacred. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to do the same thing because we do have a special bond. I like this class. I like this class. Hey guys, applause is deep through money. You know what I'm saying?
I left my wallet at home.
Okay, listen carefully. Listen carefully. I am going to allow you to use your notes on exam number 2, right? Now, the worksheets are off limits, right? But the PowerPoint that I gave you, you can use that because I gave it to you as notes, right? So you can use your PowerPoints, you can use your handwritten notes, but no handouts, right, on the exam. Let me think. Remember, bring a pencil, bring a calculator, be on time. Folks, now we've got a pretty huge emergency going on everywhere in the United States right now. So what I want to tell you about this is if something happens and you're not able to be here on Friday, a simple email is not enough, right? I need you to go to the doctor. I need a doctor's note. Or your funeral notice, whatever it may be. You know what I'm saying? I hope nobody gets sick between now and then. Guys, take special precautions. This is serious. Right? What is going on in the United States today is a very, very serious thing. So wear your mask, no matter where you're at. Be respectful of your fellow human beings, right? Because there's a lot of people that are not only sick, a lot of people dying. And that's clearly not a cool thing, right? So we need to bond together and get through this as best we can. So study like you were not going to use your notes because your notes is not going to pass this thing for you, right? So you're going to need to be prepared before you come in. Do you have any questions between now and then? Let me know. If not, stay safe. I'll see everybody Friday morning.